I'm going to pass over to Danny and Rick, who are going to provide a bit more of a deep dive into data collaboration platforms generally, and give them a round warm of applause, please.
Thanks, JJ. Maybe before I kick off, Rick, do you want to give your 30-second intro before we jump in, and then I'll start from the top?
Sure. So I'm Rick Knott. I'm the General Manager for Australia and New Zealand for InfoSum.
It was less than 30 seconds, Rick. I thought we practiced this yesterday. And I'm Danny Tyrrell. I'm one of the co-founders of a company called Dataco Technologies. We're actually an Australian-born secure data collaboration company, which was spun out of one of the big banks, ANZ Bank, here in Australia. And today we're going to give you a bit of just a brief overview of some of the content that JJ was just talking through, and really about the evolution of just data collaboration platforms in general. I'll start with a bit of background, touching on maybe some of the technologies you've been using day in, day out for the last few years, and then transition into the space of kind of the modern data collaboration platforms, which are getting a lot of attention, particularly around clean rooms and variations of those. So before we actually jump in, I just want to give a bit of context with some definitions around the different spaces of data when we talk around data collaboration, because I think sometimes when we think of data collaboration, we always think external, but actually there's many different forms of data collaboration. So from a data perspective, we kind of have these different levels of the data ecosystems. We have first-party data, which is really the data you get directly from your customers from a direct relationship with them. We then move into the space of what we call second-party data. And what second-party data is another organization's first-party data. So there's still that direct relationship with the customer. It's not necessarily an organization's direct relationship with the customer. And then we move into the third-party data space. And this is where sometimes this data is not collected from directly from the customer. It may be from public sources. It may be from different areas where it's been aggregated up. But this has definitely been a space which has had a lot of attention and a lot of growth and a lot of values being created over the years through third-party data. But one of the areas which has been particularly challenged with how we're moving away from our different privacy regulations and our privacy environments in general. So where have we come through? So over the years, there's been different collaboration solutions which have emerged to solve different problems along these ecosystems. So back in the 90s, it was more around how do we best get that view of our customer through these sales cycles? And that's really where we saw the popularity of CRMs really start to grow. From there, as CRM started to expand, we started to say, actually for advertising, we want more of these enriched customer audiences with more data. And we started moving more into this DMP space, very much driven by third-party data and aggregated information, a lot of the times a lot more short-lived, but we're helping to drive a lot of work in the advertising space. More recently, what you've seen is really the rise of CDPs. So CDPs have then taken a step back to say, actually, we want to have that view of our own customer, but we need this broader view. We want their online, their offline activities. Maybe we're enriching that with third-party or second-party data, but it's become that single source of truth within an organization, not just the sales cycles you saw through a CRM. But what's changed in just our general data landscape, which is really pushing us to the next generation of data collaboration. We've spoken around this before, but consumers' expectations is just changing. There's a lot more awareness now around how data is used, what's happening, driven not only by data breaches, but by other events like, say, the big Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal, which really brought data back into the limelight and really exposed what organizations are doing with data. So our consumers are changing in terms of their expectations. And then on the other side, really the general privacy landscape is changing. So this is being driven not only by regulation, a great panel this morning on the Privacy Act and what that may mean in terms of regulation change here in Australia, but also by organisations. So Apple's decision to stop app tracking across their devices really had a big impact to the data that was available to a lot of organisations. And really the impact you're seeing from there is actually the data that's available to marketers and advertising is changing. It's being restricted and our view of customers is actually changing. And that's really where we see this space of data collaboration particularly between organisations, is really starting to emerge as a position that may help to create shared value for organisations, but also for consumers in this more privacy-first era. So what does that actually mean, the two-party data sharing? Really, this is when two organisations are collaborating on this first-party data asset. So this is doing the first-party to second-party data to then create new insights to go through a number of different channels or a number of different downstream activities, whether it be creating marketing audiences, whether it be measuring attribution, whether it's understanding segmentation. But it's really around this ecosystem about how we share data between organisations. And from the surface, that might sound contrary to some of these privacy principles that we started to hear, but actually it's a step towards where we're trying to go in this privacy-first environment. Because what it means is if you can securely collaborate on data with other partners, you actually can minimize the data you have to hold. There's not this concept of having to hoard all the information around an individual customer to get this big view. I can actually start to work with my partners only for the pieces of information that we need to do and use that to create that value going forward. What that also allows is a lot more competition and differentiation. So it's not just the large organizations who have the massive data who they're controlling the advertising ecosystem or the marketing ecosystems. All of a sudden you can start to create more strategic partnerships to create differentiated audiences or propositions or products, which is starting to push down into that space. So why hasn't this been what we've been doing today? So obviously there's a few things to do with the availability of third-party data, some of the different things to do with how we can just use our own information, but largely one of the big reasons is to do with risk and control. So to date, even though there's the concept of individual consumer privacy we've been talking to, there's actually another whole space to do with commercial sensitivity. So for two organisations to share their data, they may be exposing other things around their organisation, the size of their book, certain customers that they have. So a lot of large organisations have typically fallen up trying to go down this path in the past because of a number of different risks. Also, maybe their data wasn't good enough to clean in the first place to be able to collaborate on, but primarily one of the main reasons is to do with risk. So what was the solutions to date? It was really around some organisations just saying, let's just accept the risk and let's pass around CSV files with customer data. I'm sure if I made people raise their hands, and I won't do this because I don't want to incriminate anyone, but how many people here, in your mind, raise your hand, have sent a CSV file with raw customer data externally to your organisation? I'm sure then the number of people with their hands up in their minds is concerning. But the reality is that has been practiced to date, right? That's just how we've been going around these processes, and sometimes people have just been accepting those risks. Some organisations have turned to the middle and said, let's find a trusted third party, let's pay some consultants a lot of money, let's give them all the data, let's them work with it, and let's get to the outcome. A good way to manage the risk, very expensive, very time consuming, not really something which you can do on a repeatable basis very easily. And then the third space is just say, no sharing, let's just stay in the aggregate and let's really just anonymize everything and really just aggregate data to start with, which is good. It removes some of the privacy concerns, but does limit the value. So the reason why we've progressed to where we are a little bit more today is actually a few different reasons, but one of the core reasons is the technology that underpins all of these solutions has been progressing and advancing. And has been progressing and advancing in a way that continues to reinforce security, continues to reinforce the privacy of customers, and gives us new pathways and avenues to be able to share and collaborate on data in a trusted way. So what I've shown you here, and you won't hear these terms often when we talk about clean rooms or collaboration platforms, because this is really like the underworkings of what's going on, but it's important to be aware that this is why some of this stuff is now possible. And one of the main reasons is this space of privacy-enhancing technologies, so sometimes called PETs, which have really started to come to the forefront. So what this is, PETs isn't a single solution. It's a number of different approaches which solve different types of problems. There's not one PET, which is a thing that solves everything and that's what you're going to use. They all have different trade-offs. Some are really computationally heavy, some are really fast, but maybe are less private. Some are just weighted to do with aggregate and noise. There's lots of different things that go in. But really the core concept here is we're starting to move to working in the encryption space. The way to describe some of these technologies, and excuse me for going, I don't know if this is slightly technical for a second, but a lot of the data concepts we always talk about with security was like data encryption at rest. So do I encrypt my data when I store it? There's data encryption in transit. Am I encrypting my data when I'm sending it somewhere? All of these technologies is like data encryption in use. So how do I make sure that my data stays protected while I'm trying to do analysis on that data? So a range of different things. Again, the benefit of a lot of the platforms which are building on this is a lot of the complexities being taken away, so organizations don't have to think about it, and they're now being productized into solutions. So these things aren't new. The main reason they're now a little bit more available, same reason anything happens with technology and Moore's law. Computation is becoming way faster. The transit speeds are way faster, storage way cheaper. So now we're at a point where actually we're being able to operationalize some of these technologies. So one quick example just to make this come to life a little bit, just so you know what we're talking about before I pass over to Rick to walk you through actually what platforms are using these technologies and where they're looking to go. Let me just walk through an example of what I mean here. So say you have some customer data. What these privacy enhancing technologies are doing is taking those data and running them through these different encryption and masking protocols. And yes, maybe I know today there's been things like a hashed email is considered to be safe. A lot of organizations would actually argue that a hashed email can be reversed and can be shown. What these technologies are doing is more advanced versions of encryption where the outputs that you're getting here can't be reversed. They can't go back, but they're in a state where if the technology platforms are managing them, they can go to matching services, be able to understand common records, and do that linkage without having to say, share first name, last name, date of birth, whatever it is. Very important when you think about things like the data breaches, because now we don't have to have all of this sensitive information littered through the environment, but we're able to still get the utility of, say, connecting records to be able to perform things like our segmentation or general analytics, many different use cases. What happens is those records can then be taken through for many different downstream activities, and in some cases pushed back out to go into our general ecosystems for advertising or whatever it needs to be. But one of the key points you'll hear come up not only now, but as we go through the rest of the conversations today, is this little line there starts to re-identify. So when we start talking around the Privacy Act thing, these technologies are not a catch-all. There's still implications around what information gets exposed, what we need to protect, but it's more the pathways that we have here to protect the data and control that privacy here and in use, and are now being used to create these collaboration systems going forward. So I might just pass over to Rick. He's going to give a bit more of a view of not just where these are, but what they've actually taken to in real solutions that are in use today.
Thanks, Danny. So Danny's given you a really awesome overview of all of the journey that data collaboration has gone. I'm going to go much deeper. Which way? No. I'm going to go much deeper, specifically into the hot topic, data clean rooms. Now, very soon you're going to realize which one of us two is the product one and which one of us is the commercial guy. So get ready. Hold on to your hats. Here we go. I'm going to talk to you about data clean rooms because 12 months ago, I stood on this very stage and spoke about data clean rooms when they were very much, certainly nascent in this market, shall we say. I wanted to try and clear up some of the obvious confusion that may have been out there. And I can safely say that I've totally failed. There's more confusion in market at the moment around data clean rooms than there possibly even was 12 months ago. Fundamentally, though, I think the reason for this, or there's many reasons, but one of the main reasons for this is that there's a misalignment between the name and the product. The product is not a data clean room. Data clean room is simply a feature of a product. There's a much larger solution available, and data clean rooms enable that solution to occur. Now, The four main types of products that are out there that use data clean rooms from a privacy lens can be put onto some kind of grid like this. This isn't perfect. There's certainly people in the room that will be able to poke holes in this. It's also more simplistic, but hopefully for those that are very concerned, very confused about data clean rooms, they will get some kind of understanding from this. So the first one to start with is the one probably we're most familiar with, which is the walled garden data clean room. These are specialized because they're used for individual vendor use cases. Traditionally, you need to centralize or share your data into their environment, but even this is changing now. With new interoperability capabilities like Google Pair, this box is going to shift up. But currently, let's just keep it in that box for now. Then you have your CRM or identity services, data clean rooms. The whole reason for being is they provide an onboarding service for your data. Therefore, they require you to move the data into their environment, centralize it. They go off very broad use cases, everything from CRM to identity to onboarding and so on, and advertising. And they typically come with some form of managed service. Then you get into the data warehouse and the cloud storage data clean rooms. These do centralize, but they centralize within their own environment. So it's less movement, it's less sharing of data. They do it within their own cloud service. That's obviously a flip side to that, is they can only work within their own cloud service. But they're very broad usage, can be used for lots of different industries and lots of different use cases, and they have full SQL and Python type capabilities. Finally, you have data collaboration platforms, what used to be, as of a few months ago, known as independent data clean rooms, and before that, decentralized data clean rooms. This naming convention is probably going to settle on data collaboration platform, is my guess. But the idea is that these are typically decentralized. What that means is your data doesn't leave your own ecosystem. It stays within it, and they do what's called decentralized edge processing, where they process all the data where it's stored. There's no need to data share. They're typically interoperable with various data collaboration, or with various cloud services. But they are specialized. They're typically industry focused. You get ones for health, you get ones for advertising, marketing, and so on. And they have the appropriate features for each. So that's the four main types of data collaboration platforms, data clean room platforms that use data clean rooms. Let's focus a little bit on data collaboration platforms and what they're doing and where they're going. Give away the result. Data collaboration platforms traditionally, unsurprisingly, have been focused on how they collaborate on data. What's the methodology? What's the process? How are they going to go about it? Many of them in the marketing space have brought in planning tools and the ability to segment and build the audiences. The big thing that they're going to be focused on over the next 6 to 12 months, and you're going to see rolling out quite a lot, is measurement. Measurement obviously is incredibly important because it helps to close that loop. So they can do the collaboration, they can do the planning, they can do the segmentation, they can do the activation, and then finally they can do the measurement, and then back to collaboration and start again. And being able to build out that loop will be able to provide that full service. Many of them today do already have some form of measurement capabilities, but that's just going to grow and grow. Secondly, this is a much less technical slide than Danny had, but essentially what Danny referred to there is in the past there's often been this trade-off between privacy and performance. You can put things in a box and not let anyone have access to it, but it's pretty useless. Or you can get a whole bunch of PII and throw it into the programmatic ecosystem, not very privacy safe, but very high performance. You're going to see more and more shifts away from having to do this. We're going to see a lot of development of various solutions, of which Danny named a few on his previous slide, but terms like tokenization, terms like mathematical representation, cryptographic, so on. You're going to hear these terms quite a lot, and they're all about trying to being able to get rid of this balance that's been required historically. To just give one example of how one might work, imagine if data was a personal photograph. Imagine you took that personal photograph and you broke it down into the composite pixels. Each of those pixels will have its own unique digital signature, and those digital signatures can then be matched rather than the data themselves. So the key thing that all of these things will have in common, probably, is that you're not processing the actual data itself, either raw or encrypted. You're processing a mathematical representation. Final one for product development here is one of the big benefits of using mathematical representations is that is the speed that you can work with. It's just calculations going against each other rather than data being processed. And traditionally, you've had a problem with data clean rooms, which is very limited amounts of data sets that can be collaborated within. Maybe 2, sometimes 3, but that's all going to change. We're going to see a huge amount of different data sets being able to be collaborated with each other at the same time, based upon various levels of permissioning that can be given or taken away at any moment. And people are going to build their own private data networks. Finally, ultimately, what this is going to lead to is the democratization of data collaboration. We'll see right now today, to use lots of data clean rooms, you need some element of code capabilities, predominantly SQL, but we will see that shift to more drag and drop capabilities and even potentially AI and ChatGPT type requests. This will move the data clean rooms away from just being a tool of the data scientist into a tool of the marketers and planners, and they will have that within their suite of tools that they can use. And as mentioned, we're going to move away from this hindrance of only being able to collaborate on 1 or 2 partners at a time. Processing will be done in seconds, so you can really actually plan properly without having to constantly wait for these data to be processed. And we'll be moving away from having to trust other environments because no one's going to get access to your data anymore. So they'll be moving to what's being coined a zero trust environment. Most data collaborations done through a data clean room at the moment will require or are being activated through PMPs. We will see that will change and become more RTB orientated. Okay, so where should you be at with your clean room strategy today, and more generally your data collaboration strategy today? Well, testing, testing, testing. That's where everyone should be. If you're not testing, then you are behind. We all know, as we've mentioned, the Privacy Act review came out, but you should be running your own privacy review of your own business. You should be looking at your consent mechanisms. You should be looking at how you collaborate on data. Who has access to your data right now? Not just data today, but the data you sent them a year ago. Have they still got it? Questions like this are things you should be asking and starting to review. Testing various privacy-enhancing technologies and engaging external privacy partners to give you advice. We're all sick of talking about cookie deprecation, but even though that we are, it's still happening. And you should be, whilst cookies are around, you should be testing first and second party data strategies against cookies so that you can understand and learn and be ready for when they do go. And finally, as we've sort of alluded to many times, interoperability is beginning to occur. Google Pair launched private invite last week. This is now available through DV360, where you can get data clean rooms to be interoperable and create a programmatic buying model based upon that data. So all this stuff is moving. You should be testing all of this right now, and if you're not, you are probably a bit behind. So, cool. Any questions?
We'll let the more interactive side of things take place now because it's already 10:25. So, gentlemen, if you would mind taking your seats. Thank you. And then Rashida is running this one. Thank you so much. And the other panelists come down. Because if there's specific questions on that, just weave them into the questions that you have for the panel. For once, I'm speeding things up. I'm famous for rattling on.
Hello. Yes, here we are. I like this lectern, it's not too high. This could have been really ridiculous. Thank you, Danny. Thank you, Rick. That was a brilliant presentation. So we are going to go to our panel and delve a little bit deeper on the subject of data collaboration. I'm going to start with you, Gabby. Obviously, data collaboration technologies have evolved a lot over the last decade. And I really loved your slide from CRM to DMP to CDPs. And that's a conversation now I have with clients a lot, because this technology investments is probably going a lot faster than a lot of our marketing clients can keep up with. What advice do you have specifically for publishers seeking to evolve and to future-proof their data strategies, Gabby?
Hopefully this is working. Yeah. Look, I think first recognise the industry is full of acronyms, so I just want to put that out there to start with, so it becomes really confusing. I think none of us would be surprised if eventually it turns out that some of our publishers probably have multiple strains of influencer in their tech stack because it was packaged up as an acronym, right? Like, we're probably going to end up at that point. But I think the point is actually about the fragmentation. So that exists now. I expect that exists moving forward as well. So that it's probably a fool's errand to necessarily run against giving advice, but there's a couple of focus areas, and I think Rick did a fabulous job of being able to actually deconstruct what it looks like in terms of the possibilities around there. I think the risk, though, at the moment is that for a publisher very specifically, is that they have more than one use case that they need to be able to address. And so focusing on the problem is actually critically more important than focusing on the solution at this point. And the other piece is that whilst we have all of these acronyms coming forward, we'll have more solutions that come forward to address potential problems, including data collaboration. And it's important to recognise that some of those at the moment potentially have elements of data collaboration capabilities in them, or some have data collaboration capabilities but might be single function technologies. And so that adds significantly more complexity, fragmentation for a publisher to start with. So that's the first focus point. So it really comes back to some of the simplistic sort of scenarios that sit around that. So the first pieces of focus areas I think will remain the same for data collaboration as everything else for a publisher. So that is your data first and foremost. That is gold if you're a publisher, especially as you're competing in a media context against other sort of platforms, etc. The second piece absolutely is privacy. We've spoken about that consistently across here. And the third piece is integration, especially when you think about the context of the complexity that we're looking at in here. And I think that bit gets significantly harder moving forward if you're a publisher. So they're the three focus areas, but there's a layer to each of those, or three layers to each of those, that become areas that I really think they need to hone in on. And that is quality of each of those components as the first one, right? So it's really significant and important that you focus on the quality of your data, the quality of the data partnerships that you actually move forward with. It's important that the quality of your privacy is in place. It's not just a tokenistic thing. Really dig into the data and the governance that sits around it, and not just the basic frameworks of externally how you comply with consent, but how you actually might start addressing preferences to actually start, increasing that trust component. But also think about the next layers that might actually think about, privacy as well moving forward. And then also, as I said, the next sort of layer that I'd overlay on top of that is that for a publisher, you have all of those challenges, but you also need to apply all of the challenges from an application to an advertiser. So if you don't have quality data, you don't have quality privacy, you don't have quality integrations, you're passing that complexity and that risk on to them as well. So, and then the final layer is obviously the piece that you'd think about is that future-proofing. We've already seen so much change, and I think the reality is that we haven't finished, and we'll see so much more. So you have to have the flexibility to be able to, think about what that looks like moving forward. And again, I think those three components, if they're there, but you add those three layers onto it, they're the three times three, the three cube sort of scenarios that I would be thinking about if I was a publisher.
Yeah, thank you. And Danny, on the CDPs, they are kind of the shiny new toy of the marketing and advertising world. They're very popular at the moment. What do you think has driven that trend? And are CDPs future-proof enough? Because, from a marketing perspective, for marketing teams, there are a lot of investments when they go into a new technology. Or do you think they are just a passing technology as we enter the next era?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think what's driven the importance of CDPs has really been that focus back to this first-party data and knowing the individual. And a lot of that's this whole requirements around personalisation and being intimate with our customers. That's really what drove the trend back into CDPs, plus a lot of fragmentation, I think, internally with organisations. People had data lakes, got CRMs, got data everywhere, and they needed to try and make this single view of the customer, consolidated view. So I think that's really what drove them to this point. Are they future-proof? I think the concept of what CDPs are trying to solve won't change. I think that consolidated view of a customer across your channels, across your organisations is incredibly important because it's a massive point of frustration with customers and organisations if you don't have that view. Where I think they'll need to evolve, and the question is whether that becomes in the CDP or that's just working with other technologies in the ecosystem, is more around these privacy points that you were talking about before, the quality, the traceability. So as regulation changes, as expectation changes, we need to keep track of data. We need to know what's there. We need to know the use of the data. So I think where CDPs will evolve to will either be working very close hand in hand with technologies like consent management platforms or external data collaboration platforms to get data in and out. But the theme here is going to be traceability, transparency, privacy, and security. Those are the things which are going to drive where CDPs go in the future.
Yeah, that's a really good point about the integration with partnerships. About data in and out, I'm going to go to you, Chloe, because obviously LiveRamps, you work with both the buy side and the sell side to responsibly enable data assets. What recommendation do you have for our industry as a result of the evolving legislative proposal that we're seeing here?
Yeah, definitely. There's a few things that comes to mind, but I think what's important to highlight at this time is that now more than ever, really, it's about putting consumers at the heart of absolutely everything we do. And I think for businesses, we need to have that culture of accountability. That's going to be really successful. A successful point when it comes to this highly regulated world of data. First-party data strategies are going to be important when it comes to the concept of that value exchange. So focusing on having your data strategy around value exchange, the consent piece, making sure that whatever strategy you're building is underpinned by those clear notice, choice and control mechanisms around how data is being collected and used. That needs to really form a point because that's what the privacy review focuses on, and that was spoken about, that concept of consent. And then I think if businesses are then using that data in appropriate and ethical ways within the confines of the law, but also with foresight that goes beyond, the regulatory guidelines, then you're going to be in a good position when it comes to those deep-rooted customer relationships. I think as well when it comes to building out new privacy frameworks and looking at what this legislation proposes, getting entire business buy-in is going to be really pivotal. So executive buy-in, sorry. So getting your CFO across any changes that you want to make from a fundamental perspective, showcase them how you might be tracking and observing success when it comes to changes that you're wanting to make. Get your legal counsel involved, your data and ethics privacy officers involved, because they're going to need to showcase, different kinds of leading edge technologies that they're happy to invest in, as well as your chief analytics officer, because they're going to be your friend when it comes to things like helping you get access to data, understanding if you're going to need to be reducing data silos, all those kinds of things for getting your house in order, essentially, when you're adopting new technology. And then lastly, the other one is this redefinition of PI and how digital identifiers are going to be allowed to be used that the privacy review talks about at length. What this means is it's going to be harder for brands to get closer to your customers, and you're going to have to do a lot more to understand them beyond the confines of your own four walls. So investing in strategic partnerships, using your first-party data is going to be pivotal in this new landscape. And this is where collaboration comes in, right? Collaboration is going to give you the ability to drive new business opportunities as well as continue to power your data-driven marketing tactics. So look to build those relationships, but in the same breath, make sure when you're choosing vendors, you're looking at them very carefully from that privacy lens as well as a strategic lens. Look for solutions that are going to have things like configurable privacy controls and making sure that it's underpinned by privacy-enhancing technologies. And if you are bringing in additional data sets like third-party data vendors, make sure that they are being vetted, that they are compliant when it comes to consumer law and all those sorts of things. Look for things like interoperability. Is the solution agnostic? Is it underpinned by identity? And that ties into this future-proofing piece. Also, maybe not even necessarily just local legislation, but global legislation. Brands are global these days, right? And then I think also look to your vendor of choice as well to see if they can help introduce you to areas of collaboration with their partners, because generally they will have already been vetted when it comes to a privacy and security perspective.
Yeah, that's really great advice. Thank you, Chloe. I hope everyone was taking notes there. Obviously, you know, the data sharing, the collaboration, the strategic partnership, the focus on quality of data is super important when it comes to creating value for brands, because that's the point of that data sharing from an advertising purposes, is to create value and efficiency. Lorraine, I'm going to come to you. What have you seen in terms of data partnerships that has been really meaningful from your side?
Thanks. Something that hasn't really been talked about yet, to me, is what I'm really actually excited about, which is the innovation we're about to see. So data collaboration, to me, sparks innovation. There's no way around it. And what's the key word from your question is there is meaningful. Yeah. So looking at meaningful partnerships, and Gabby, to your point, it has to be about quality. So if I'm to sort of look back at a case, if anyone was at the Programmatic Digital Out-of-Home Summit a couple of weeks ago, they talked about a Tourism Tasmania case study. And if you weren't there, that's okay. I can give you a very condensed version, but it's a great example of how the right partnerships can do amazing things for brands. So in the condensed version, Yahoo partnered with JCDecaux and Starcom and Nia to bring all collaboration at all levels of the campaign lifecycle, insights, planning, targeting, and attribution to an omni-channel Tourism Tasmania campaign that was heroed by Digital Out of Home. And the way it was meaningful to each partnership. So Yahoo brought in their publisher first-party data, which you can't get anywhere else, obviously. JCDecaux had their unique out-of-home supply, and using audience segmentation solutions, Tourism Tasmania was able to create a seed audience of people who had been exposed to an out-of-home ad and then retarget them across other mediums like display, video, audio, etc. And then to measure the campaign effectiveness, we utilised our partnership with Nia so that Tourism Tasmania was able to see the impact of their conversion attribution. And the campaign itself was innovative in its approach because it was using a historically offline media channel to gather all of the data that drove the omnichannel strategy. And obviously it was a really big success for Tourism Tasmania. They saw a 51% uplift of people going to Tasmania during the coldest time of the year, and that was directly attributed to the campaign, like so cold. So I think it's fair to say that the data collaboration that we saw didn't just spark the innovative approach, but it also helped drive the results that we saw. So I agree with both of you. It's really important to engage in multiple meaningful partnerships that are done consciously and with intent, and that are going to bring benefits for yourself as a publisher or for your brand, whatever way you integrate with them. But it has to be done within the appropriate frameworks, which is what today is all about discussing.
Yeah, thank you. I love that example because you go from targeting to measurement, and all of the partners have a really key role to play and supporting an advertiser that probably doesn't have a lot of their own first-party data. So the potential and the ground for innovation is so fertile. I don't know if that's a right phrase to use. But oftentimes what advertisers have is a little bit of paralysis because there's just so many options. And actually the use cases are so important to build those strategic partnerships. So thank you for sharing that. Rick, obviously we've heard from the privacy experts in the first panel, and thank you again for that presentation with Danny. That was really, really interesting. How confident are you that data clean rooms as they evolve, can manage all of the concerns and requirements that we are seeing emerge in the new consumer privacy legislation?
Yeah, sure. It's an interesting question, and obviously one that's very hard to be definitive about. I will refer to my presentation that ultimately data clean rooms are just a feature of a product, and everybody uses them in different ways, has different use cases, has different methodologies, has different products that they build on top of those data clean rooms. And so some of them, most of them, I'm sure will be absolutely fine, because most of them are born out of places like Europe, GDPR environments. However, yeah, some of them may have to evolve, may have to change the way that they do certain features or certain things that they do. Even for those that do survive, data clean rooms are not a silver bullet to solve for all of the privacy legislation that's going to come down the pipe. Data clean rooms will typically help you with the how you do something, not the what you're doing. And a lot of privacy legislation is around the what, and these two things get quite confused. One of the places these get confused quite a lot is in the difference between privacy and security. A lot of times I hear people talking about hashed emails, and hashed emails will help you with security, but they don't really do anything for privacy. Hashed PII is still PII at the end of the day under privacy legislation. So, so for those, that's going to be you're going to have to look at the details. But ultimately, this brings me to a bigger point, which is we shouldn't be thinking about privacy from the perspective of what's the minimum I can do? What's the checkbox I have to hit? And then I can say I'm privacy compliant. We should think about privacy like we think about all of our ESG. What's the best I can do? What's the most privacy compliant or privacy capable I can be? How can I show the most respect to my clients, my customers, my partners around their data, rather than what's the minimum I can get away with, really?
Yeah, 100%. And thank you for bringing up the subject of security. I think when we talk about the new legislation, we often talk about the data breaches that we've seen in this market and how they might accelerate our need for this privacy reform. But actually, privacy and security are very different things. Danny, you've contributed to the Data Council Explainer. Thank you so much for that. We know how important education is in this area, and you helped us all be a little bit more educated today. What are the key myths that you frequently hear from this industry in media or potentially in prospective clients that we want to dispel today?
I think one of the key ones, I completely agree with Rick's point actually on the silver bullet. This whole concept that you use a clean room and you're secure or private, that is absolutely a myth. Like the whole what you do with it, what goes in or out, there's so much more to it than that. It's not going to solve all your problems, and it's not going to make everything else go away. The only thing I will say, just on the nuance of that though, is it's going to be this continuum. So I do agree that we should be doing our best to be private and secure, absolutely, with our consumers, but the most privacy and secure way of doing stuff is to just don't use the data. Just completely lock it away and do nothing. So I don't think that necessarily drives the innovation point that we were talking about before. So it's nearly this balance between we absolutely need to be doing our best to have the security and the privacy, but sometimes that's also with transparency. So using people's personal information isn't bad. Using people's personal information for things they don't know about and that are not fair and reasonable, maybe that's bad. So I think we can't forget about transparency. We can't think about how we need to continue to create value through the ecosystem. So that was probably the only nuance there. The only other big myth I'd probably call out is some of the things that Rick was talking about before, and we're saying where we're going with things like data clean rooms and collaboration. Sometimes I think people read this or see, I put up a slide with privacy enhancing technology. It always sounds scary. People think it's the future, or it's hard, or it's expensive. It's here now, and it's actually can be very simple. The solutions that have been progressing in market, both the new ones and the ones that have been around for a few years, are getting so simple. They're so fast to use. And it means that you don't need these technical skills to do it. So I think it's important to note that these things are ready to do today. We've had organisations who begin to collaborate and like literally within an afternoon of saying, okay, we'll start to move our data to the platform, that afternoon they know they're common customers with another organisation. Without revealing it, just seeing the high-level statistics that they can go back to their governance and say, let's get the approvals, let's keep going. And a day later, they're starting a campaign. So know that it's not hard, it's not complex. It's actually here today and it's ready to go.
That's very encouraging. Ray Kinfosom was very involved in helping draft the technical specs from IB Tech Lab as standard for data clean rooms, and we've included a summary of these in the Data Council's explainer. Why is it so important to have standards such as these, and how do they enable our industry to commit more time and resources into data collaboration solutions with greater confidence?
Yeah, sure. Obviously, it's important to have standards, guidelines, and a foundation to what a business is. It's great to have a period of time where innovators run around and they do cool things and everything, but at some point you have to make some kind of guidelines, some kind of rules around what it is you do and how you operate, because only then can you become a scalable and valuable part of the MarTech stack. So it's important, definitely, like I say, for products themselves. Products need to do this, need to be part of this, because, like I say, you can only build features on features if the ground is solid and it's not constantly shifting into something else. And it's only once you have all these features do you have a scalable product. It's valuable and important for, obviously, clients and brands to understand that this isn't just some form of vaporware, that this is a real thing that's been validated and it has social proof and so on. And then obviously it's valuable for the entire industry, because no MarTech solution works optimally on its own. It has to integrate or be interoperable with other elements of the MarTech stack. And they can't do that if, again, the product keeps changing. You know, others can't build into you or you into them if what you do keeps moving and the foundations aren't there.
Yeah, absolutely. And Chloe, I'll come back to you when we're talking about interoperability of MarTech, because LiveRamp, you're already leveraging clean rooms in this market for clients. Can you talk us through some current example of these capabilities and the related business use cases?
Yeah, for sure. What we're actually seeing globally and now more often in this market is enterprises coming to us for more advanced use cases that go just beyond the basic use case of a data clean room, you know, merging data sets. They're wanting to do a lot more advanced things like closed loop measurement, customer journey analytics, understand incrementality, revenue impact, and then in a solution be able to then, off the back of these insights, create audience segments that can be connected back to activation channels that underpin the entire advertising ecosystem, all in one place. So I would say this is definitely evolving in Australia, and now more than ever as well, because we are actually bringing publishers to the party, which is becoming really interesting because they can actually add value to all three layers of activation, collaboration, and measurement. So I'd say that some of the most interesting partnerships that we're seeing flourish at LiveRamp at the moment are between publishers, particularly in the BVOD space, our retailers and our brands, or FMCG clients. Right. Because what we're noticing is obviously retailers want to own a lot of the touch points along the customer journey and drive value for their business, while CPGs or brands, on the other hand, don't have a lot of first-party data, so they need to be able to find out more about their customers. So if you bring publishers into this scenario, they can start to provide really valuable insights on these individuals from a behavioural, demographic, interest perspective, as well as add in those layers of media exposure so we can tie everything together. So in a really safe and secure environment, when you can bring in customer PI, transaction data, insights, retailers can now understand who's buying their product, how often they're buying, where they're buying, and tie that directly back to digital media, which is really good for the publishers. And brands now can understand who their customers are, which is going to be really good when it comes to that precision targeting and much more meaningful messaging. So, you know, we have questions like, you know, I want to understand over-indexing behavioural insights across, you know, consumers who are buying my product, or I want to understand incremental lift, but I don't have the transaction data to compare it to. So I think what we're starting to see now is brands using tools that are maximising their data opportunity without sacrificing privacy or accuracy, because we can measure in a much more refined way. And then they're now able to shift that perception internally as well from their marketing efforts being a cost centre to now a revenue driver, which is fantastic.
And that's the ultimate question for every marketer is, what did I drive with my marketing budget? And they need to report internally for that. So, yeah, that's great. Gabby, what are some of the immediate priorities for businesses here, both with offline and online data sets, keen to enable these for advertising in the future?
Yeah, great question. Obviously critical to recognise that as consumers, we don't live in only a digital context, right? So when you bring the notion of your online data and your offline data together, you're clearly increasing the fidelity of your understanding of that. And to Danny's point, the value of a CDP obviously sits in the ability to be able to bring those notions sort of together. I think, sort of where we go from there, what matters, what's important is what matters next. And so almost go to, the three things that I think would be most valuable is, again, understanding the data, understanding the privacy, and then understanding the activation is the critical piece there, to your point around advertising. So what you do next with each of those first two things, the data and the privacy. So advertising is clearly, an activation, I think, from that point of view, but it's not the only activation you need to keep in mind. And so you need to start with the use case to be able to understand the first two to start with. So in the instances of online and offline data coming together, a lot of clients will have, sometimes one that's very rich and the other one not necessarily so, or they may lack the scale to be able to achieve things. So in the instances of those two things, you're either going to have to increase your scale or increase your enrichment of each of those, which means you're going to have to think about your data partnerships again significantly more in the integrations to be able to activate things downstream, like advertising. You need to then consider things like, for example, if you're partnering with an ID solution, for example, how that pulls through in your activation for advertising purposes. So you've got to think of the last thing first in those sort of instances. And similarly with the privacy sort of notion in there as well, if you haven't considered that first, and I love the point about absolutely doing the best of what you possibly could do within this notion, but the best of what you possibly could do is actually data minimisation. And that also speaks to the point about what data you do hold. Hold the stuff that's most valuable to you because it will be unique to you, and then partner with those other people. But back to that privacy point again, I think if you're thinking about the activation downstream, a lot of people don't think about those integrations and the consequences of not getting those right from a privacy point of view. And a really great example I think we've seen just in the last 24, 48 hours, a lot of people integrating with a CMP, for example. But if your speed to advertising requires you to execute on a bid scenario, and that is you have to do that super fast, you have to be able to allow for things like, your consent compliance to actually happen. And that doesn't always happen in 0.1 of a second that you need to do a pre-bid, right? So you've got to think about, that's next action in an advertising context and the consequence for what happens in terms of how you set up your data and your privacy scenarios, your integration upstream. But again, I'll come back to the notion of what you do next, because your advertising isn't the only activation that you need to do. And I think certainly in this space where we do have minimal data or whatever, that's top of funnel. So you've really got to start thinking of full of funnel. And once you have value that sits at the back of that advertising data that you might bring back in to increase the fidelity again of that user data, how do you make sure then you use it then for something else more meaningful and keep adding the layers meaningfully and privacy in a privacy context for each of those consumers as well? So again, it's really, really simple, but the data, the privacy, but thinking first about what you do last to be able to understand the implications for those.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting concept, but a really important one when building the use cases as well. Lorraine, I'm going to come back to you. You gave us a very concrete example earlier. What is one piece of advice that you would provide the attendees here today of the conversation we've had today? What would you want them to remember?
Okay, there's a very good chance I'm about to make an ass of myself. The thing that it's been an incredible morning. There's been so much information thrown at us from product, technical, strategic points of view. I think three words that keep coming to my mind. I'm going to quote a very famous 80s philosopher. He said, "Stop, collaborate, listen." And and I very hard chose not to wrap that part, but anyway, here we go. What do I mean by that? Stop. First of all, we need to stop sharing raw data through a CSV, 100%. Stop doing that today. But we need to stop working in silos. So data collaboration is going to be, it's critical for a functioning and thriving advertising ecosystem and for innovation. Collaborate, I mean, that's pretty obvious. That's what we're here to talk about. But we need to do it with privacy at the helm. So clean rooms are an awesome option. But if you don't have the resources for clean rooms, you need to invest in meaningful data partnerships and make sure that they have future-proofed foundations. And the third one, listen. So our customers are telling us loud and clear that they don't feel safe and secure. And we can't expect them to understand things like privacy-enhancing techniques or regulations or any of the stuff that we've discussed this morning. And there's a very real chance that they're about to be consent bombed, which, apart from being annoying, is actually critical, because without their consent, none of this happens, and we're stuck. Yeah. So, if I was to write down my deepest, darkest secret on a piece of paper and hand it to you, Gabby. Yeah, so the first thing she did is try to look at it, right? So
It's a vendor after all.
So I've given my top secret to Gabby, and I feel, even though it's imaginary, you can do this along with me, pretend to give your secret to your neighbour there. I feel very nervous, and I feel very vulnerable. She could have a look at it, she could show it to the rest of the panel, she could show it to all of you guys, and there's a real risk of exposure to me. But if I was to write that secret down in a code that only I understood, which is encryption, suddenly I don't feel as nervous giving you my secret, because even if you were to look at it, you don't understand what it says. And there is, even if it went into the wrong hands, there's a very low risk of exposure to me. And I feel safer because of that. So how can we educate and listen to our customers to make them understand about data privacy and security and remove that fear element from it? We need to make sure that they understand that their privacy is our responsibility and it's absolutely non-negotiable for us. So I guess if there's one takeaway, make it be 3 takeaways. Stop, collaborate, listen.
Thank you so much. A round of applause for our panelists. I'm going to look at JJ, our timekeeper for today. Do we have time for some audience questions?
Well, it'd be nice, I think, to have one. There are a couple on Slido 1 in relation to more use cases and practical examples, and that's perfectly understandable. I think the one was given. There is one in the handbook I'm going to mention, so download that, please. And another one
I think we've got a question right here.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah.
Erin.
Thank you. I just want to maybe build on Lorraine that point just there, because I think... hello. Erin Taverlet, privacy lead at Google. I loved everything you guys were saying up there, but something I'm very mindful of when I was reading the Act, or the review of the Act, what I thought was missing was this notion of innovation technology around the sector and where we're going and what's possible. And I think, Danny, you made a great point. This isn't future, it's happening today. So exactly from a consumer perspective, they don't need to necessarily know this, right? But what can we do as an industry to ensure that the people that are regulating us or informing the regulation, how can we do a better job of informing them around what's possible so that we are potentially looking to, a future state to allow us to still do what we do, but protecting privacy?
Yeah. Look, if I think I really knew the answer to that, I'd be living on an island, because that's what we're all here to discuss, and it's one of the biggest challenges and hurdles we have to face at the moment. I think from seeing what's happened in hindsight with GDPR, if we look at how consent is asked for at the moment, I don't think it's done very well. It's a pop-up that you'd barely read, and it's an accept or reject. And if anything, I think it instills more fear, because you're being asked permission to do something. And so if you have to ask permission for it, it must be bad, right? I've seen examples in the past where they do their explainer at the start and then ask for the consent later. And that to me feels a bit nicer, but I'm also a bit biased because I understand how this industry works. So I don't know, whether it's some sort of government ad campaign, whether it's education from the ground up in universities, and we start having this conversation so it can spread more openly into the community. Look, we're not going to convince everyone, but we do need to lift the shared understanding as a community, and not just an advertising community, but a community of people, that this is our future. Our future is technology. It's the same reason people are scared of AI. AI is not inherently scary. It's how it's used, and we need to make sure that that messaging of how we use our advertising is important to us. Sorry, how we use your data is important to us, and we're not going to misuse it.
Can I just add to that? I think, one of the key things that you're sort of starting to touch on, obviously, is the notion of actual control by the user, which I think goes it's a really long path, right? And that's the challenge that we've got right now, is how do you make sure you've built that trust inherently, but effectively what you're asking for is to be able to say to a consumer, I'm going to be really transparent around how I use it, but take it one step further and say, I'm going to give you control and choice over how we actually use it. So that's where the preference stuff starts to come in. And what you do over time is start to be able to build the trust. So they're not inherently nervous when you ask them for different scenarios up front. But that's a longer burn to be able to do that. But as an industry, we haven't necessarily displayed that and acted in good faith in that necessarily for the government to be able to trust us to be able to do that, I think is part of the problem. So there's a massive piece that does sit around, the literacy and the education of that, but there's a lot that's beholden on us to be able to push that provability of the trust back into how we actually interact with users currently, to prove that we are actually acting in good faith to be able to do that and let them be in control and be the decision makers on it.
Yeah, just one final point to add. I also think the other side of, I really tried hard to find out how to fit this into Stop, Collaborate and Listen. I can't do it. But still the collaborate and the transparency applies the same towards government and regulation, I think is the other key important point here. Like there's a role of industry to be proactive with how we engage and we communicate with our regulators and with government, because sometimes they just don't know. The first paper that came out, or not the first paper, the most recent paper, nearly felt like they hadn't quite been over all the details of progress industry has made. So I think a lot of the submissions which were made, the good one by the IAB, I know a lot of individual organisations made those submissions as well. Like our focus was more transparency. This is what we're doing. We're trying to be proactive in protecting privacy. We want to work with you as regulators, as government, to protect our consumers. So we can't forget the transparency. We've got to go back to regulators and government to help to progress this narrative as well.
That's a great point, because obviously the privacy enhancing technologies was really absent from the Act in and of itself, and some of the things that would be actually implied within that is your elements like suppression, for example, which actually are privacy preserving for certain industries. I think they sort of overlooked the fact that would have a consequence on some of those things as well. So yeah, I agree.
Well, I know that in Sarah's submission that we did include some information around that in terms of the specs that are available to enable that, but it's something we're going to have to lean into as an industry and work on with government together. And to Erin's point, I think it would be good that we could manage to provide a solution for consumers that is better that we're seeing elsewhere, and it works for everyone. Thank you so much, panel.